Hi, I'm Dr. Mark Andrew Holacek, philosopher, historian, Thomas Jefferson scholar. Today I want to talk a bit about Jefferson's moral sense faculty. The title of this talk is Jefferson on the Preeminency of Moral Sensing over Reason. The scholars commonly note both Jefferson's belief in a moral sense and the great regard that he, as the disciple of the Enlightenment, held for reason. Yet there's very little written on Jefferson's view of the moral sense, and astonishingly, even less on his conception of rationality. What exists somewhat cavalierly assumes that Jefferson, as a true child of Enlightenment thinking, was a keen and politically savvy rationalist, and that his moral sense was a faculty subservient to reason. For some illustrations, Jean Arbo notes that for Jefferson, the moral sense requires no uncommon degree of reason, that it cannot function alone in particular circumstances. She writes, "Reason in the form of utilitarian calculation directs the original impulses to consider the moral consequences of actions, that is, what will do good to others under vastly different circumstances." Adrienne Coates, too, paints Jefferson as a consequentialist. She writes, "Only utilitarianism could be relied on to cut the suggestion of absolutism out of those more single-valued philosophies, making room for the variability of moral judgment which Jefferson's historic sense made him acknowledge as one segment in the development of man and society." It's much the same with Carl Richard and Maurizio Valsagna, who unsubtly grasped Jefferson's moral thinking in broad Epicurean strokes, in which rationality is the focus and ethical decisions are made from a sort of utilitarian calculus. Many others, Peter Collins, Cameron Adie, Daniel Allen, A.J. Beitzinger, and Paul Konkin, take a similar tack. The moral sense might be a suitable prima facie guide to moral understanding, but it requires the patronage of reason before we can know that a course of action is the right course of action. However, the opposite of that is the case. Jefferson consistently held that an honest heart given to all was a blessing much greater than a knowing head given to few. Much of the confusion in the secondary literature comes with scant familiarity with the moral sense in people such as Hutchinson and Keynes, or moral sentiment in people such as Adam Smith and David Hume, tradition of Jefferson's day. Jefferson was among the former, who believed that there was a sensory faculty for moral decision-making, and that that faculty functioned immediately without the input of reason. Now, Jefferson consistently maintained that moral judgment was not rational but sensual. He tells nephew Peter Carr in 1787. "I think it lost time to attend lectures in this branch, i.e. morality. He, God, would have been a pitiful bungler if he had made the rules of our moral conduct a matter of science." Over 22 years later, he writes to Reverend James Fishback in 1809. "The practice of morality being necessary for the well-being of society, Deity has taken care to impress its precepts so indelibly on our hearts that they shall not be effaced by the subtleties of our brain." Finally, in a letter to Thomas Law, Jefferson writes, "How necessary was the care of the Creator in making the moral principle so much a part of our Constitution that no errors of reasoning or of speculation might lead us astray from its observance in practice." As heart, which represents morality, says to head, which represents intellect, in Jefferson's celebrated 1786 billet doux to Maria Cosway, "I do not know that I ever did a good thing on your suggestion or a dirty one without it. I do forever then disclaim your interference in my province." Morality is telling intellect to keep out of my zone. Why then should proper use of the moral sense be sometimes difficult? It is not because of failings of the moral sense, but because of the intrusions of reason, a most disobliging guide to human action over the centuries. Reason, when it intervenes in the affairs of the heart, obtrudes on and obfuscates human judgment for reasons that are generally politico-religious. To Thomas Cooper in 1823, Jefferson states, "Man is fed with fables through life, leaves it in the belief he has known something of what has been passing, and when truth has been known, and when in truth he has known nothing but what has passed under his own eye. And who are the great deceivers? Those who solemnly pretend to be the depositories of the sacred truths of God himself." Jefferson here is clearly hinting at what empleomaniacal clerics over the centuries have done with the simple teachings of Jesus, the empleomaniacal, the ones who are striving for political power. The method of blocking the intrusions of reason is appeal to exemplars. To grandson Thomas Jefferson Randolph in 1808, Jefferson says that one can extricate oneself from trying situations by appeal to moral cynosures. He writes, "Under temptations and difficulties, I would ask myself, what would Dr. Small, Mr. Wythe, and Peyton Randolph do in the situation? What course in it will ensure me their approbation? I am certain that this mode of deciding on my conduct tended more to correctness than any reasoning powers I possessed." Okay, not only is reason uninvolved in moral judgments, it's also a limited human resource in everyday life decisions, which are typically moral, and that they are seldom without moral implications. Jefferson writes to John Randolph in 1803, "I see too many proofs of the imperfection of human reason to entertain wonder or intolerance at any difference of opinion on any subject, and acquiesce in that difference as easily as on a difference of feature or form." Short experience has taught Jefferson that persons who wish to act as a unit for any common object must accede to mutual sacrifices of opinion. Experience has also taught him the expediency of doing what good we can when we cannot do all we would wish. That is, the importance of moral compromise when the right course of action is thwarted. To Edward Livingston in 1824, Jefferson expresses confidence in leaving political matters to the genius of the next generation. He writes, "These political cares are no longer mine. I resign myself cheerfully to the managers of the ship, and more contentedly as I near the end of my voyage. I seem to have learned to be less confident in the conclusions of human reason." Again, Jefferson congratulates Dr. Edward Jenner in 1806 on behalf of the whole human family for his discovery of a vaccine for smallpox. He writes, "Harvey's discovery of the circulation of the blood was a beautiful addition to our knowledge of the animal economy, but on the review of the practice of medicine before and since that epoch, I do not see any great amelioration which has been derived from that discovery. You have erased from the calendar of human afflictions one of its greatest. Yours is the comfortable reflection that mankind can never forget that you have lived." The notion of the relative impotency of reason was in the main in keeping with Scottish philosophy, which Jefferson appropriated when it came to his moral thinking. Francis Hutcheson, in an inquiry into the original of our ideas of beauty and virtue, writes of reason being in the service of sensation and self-interest. He says, "The mighty reason we boast of above other animals, its processes are too slow, too full of doubt and hesitation to serve us in every exigency, either for our own preservation without the external senses, or to direct our actions for the good of the whole, without this moral sense." Lord Kames, in his work Principles of Morality and Natural Religion, writes, "Supposing our duty could be made plain to us by an abstract chain of reasoning, yet we have good ground to conclude from analogy that the author of nature has not left our actions to be directed by so weak a principle as reason. And a weak principle it must be to the bulk of mankind who have little capacity to enter into abstract reasoning." David Hume, in his Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding, is famous for his assault on reason concerning matters of fact. He writes, "No conclusions can be more agreeable to skepticism than such as make discoveries concerning the weakness and narrow limits of human reason. it follows that we cannot have any sort of meaningful knowledge of the physical world for Hume. Thus, Jefferson militates against rationality for several reasons. First, it is given fully to too few persons. Examples would be his triad of heroes, Bacon, Locke, and Newton. Second, its discoveries, if not in the service of the moral sense, are unpurposed and gregarious. Third, it is too readily put to wrong use. Finally, if morally correct action is sensual and simple, obliquity must be due in large part to rational encroachment. I close with a thought. Jefferson was theoretically committed to the relative impotency of reason. The victory in battle of head over heart in his 1786 love letter to Maria Cosway is a fine illustration. One might acknowledge, however, that Jefferson did not behave consistently with his theoretical commitments. In his correspondence, for instance, with Cosway, and aside from the 1786 love letter, Head advising Hart to be cautious and uninvolved with the beautiful Italian coquette seems to have won the war. Thank you.